stuck around after that.
So I actually had my first encounter with computing when I was in high school. We had time-sharing machines and paper tape. I mean, it was really bizarre. And then I undertook a science project to build a machine that plays tic-tac-toe, built from surplus relays, believe it or not, because at that time that was what I could afford. It worked. You know, if you know about tic-tac-toe, you know you never lose if you're smart, right? So, and lots of people are not so smart, so the machine would win a lot. It was sufficient to convince my then girlfriend's family that maybe I was going to do okay, and that's the person who's now my wife, so that worked out well from that perspective as well. And then I headed to college. I mean, unbelievable when you think about it. It's the 70s. You couldn't major in computer science yet. There were graduate programs, but no undergraduate programs. So I was a double E major, but I decided to go to graduate school in CS and never looked back.
And by the way, I did a distributed tic-tac-toe program in graduate school. It was real state-of-the-art. But I mean, fast forward to today and what's happening. I mean, would either of you have been surprised if someone had painted that picture for you back then?
You mean our careers?
No, well, no, not your careers, but just where we are in technology.
I mean, Gordon Moore did his prediction. He wrote an article in some IEEE magazine, where he laid out the future, right? There's little cartoons that show people, computers in cars and selling computers in store, and I don't think I believed it.
Yeah, he actually has a cartoon where somebody's selling a home computer right in this. But even Gordon was hesitant. He said, we can predict about 10 years, but I don't know longer than that. So I don't think anybody would have guessed. Who would have guessed that microprocessors would take over the entire industry, right, and replace mainframes and supercomputers eventually? Who would have guessed that the explosion of big data and what's happened in machine learning? I don't think any of us would have predicted.
I mean, machine learning is something that's been around forever, and suddenly, in the last 5 years, it's on the front page of all newspapers. That would have been hard to predict even 10 years.
Yeah, it's definitely been pretty amazing. And speaking of Moore's Law, with what is going on in Moore's Law right now?
It's over. It's over. The reason it's hard for people to believe it's over is people said 10 to 20 years ago it was over. It's over. It's double the number of transistors every year or two. John has, in our talk, John's slides show it has to continue. That doesn't mean there won't be more technological improvements. It doesn't mean we're frozen, but it's not doubling every year or two. It's doubling at a much slower rate.
So in the last 5 years, roughly, when the slowdown really became clear, there's about a gap of 10 already built up over the last 5 years. So it's going to continue. There's another problem which doesn't get talked about as much, but is actually much more acute. It's a thing called Dennard scaling. And Robert Dennard, who you all have used his technology, he's the person who invented the one transistor DRAM cell. Everybody uses it every day. He made a prediction that the amount of energy, actually the amount of power per square millimeter of silicon would stay constant. What that meant was that the energy per computation was dropping very quickly. And that was because of voltage scaling and other things. That's gone away, which is why you see processors today that have to slow their clock down or turn cores off to prevent overheating because of that fact was back.
The second generation TPU is liquid cooled. Right?
Yeah.
Right, that's the second or third generation? Third generation, I guess, is liquid cooled. And that's because of the pop with Dennard scaling in.
And liquid cool is fine when you're in a big data center, but I don't think we're going to liquid cool my phone and then put a backpack on my back of the radiator. I just don't see
it. It's become a power game.
Yeah, it's become a power game.
And it's interesting. And carrying on with that processor argument, I mean, if we could just go into, you did MIPS, you did the RISC, and bringing out new chips, and we could go through what it meant to bring out RISC, and then maybe we could go through when can you bring out custom chips and why would you? That's a big question. There's plenty to, and actually I just have to pause. We're gonna let the audience ask questions. We're gonna have 20 minutes for questions, so please think about your questions. We'll give you plenty of time.
Yeah, about a half an hour the questions will be. So RISC got started in research at Berkeley and Stanford. We not only argued for the ideas and built simulators and compilers, we both built chips.
What does RISC stand for?
Reduced Instruction Set Decay. So the idea isn't very hard. It's software speaks to hardware in a vocabulary. That vocabulary is called the instruction set. The prevailing wisdom for the big computers was a really rich, big vocabulary with $5 words. That was going to make it easier for the software and hardware. John and I thought the opposite thing to do. We should have a simplified vocabulary with simple instructions. And the question was, how many more instructions do you have to execute, and how fast could you read them? And ended up, maybe we needed 25% more instructions, but we could read them 5 times faster. So that was our research results. And in San Francisco, Stanford students and Berkeley students got up at the leading conference here in San Francisco in 1984, presented chips that were arguably better than what industry could build, which was kind of
How long
amazing.
did that take to go from the idea to that?
4 years? Yeah, 4 years.
Yeah.
How long would that take
Long.
today?
I don't know, less?
Yeah,
Yeah,
certainly.
just curious.
You know, lots of things were
Yeah.
changing at the same time. The early microprocessors, people were all programming in an assembly language, and they were switching over, so that change was occurring, which meant that you cared about what the compiler could use, not about what some clever assembly language programmer could use. Right? Unix was just coming on the scene. We were going to have an operating system written in a high-level language, and then the technology was changing. Right? Many computers were still built with these bit slice technologies, and the microprocessor was a different technology with a different set of trade-offs. And all those things added up to a discontinuity in how you should think about designing computers.
And so, was it well received?
we were seen as Molotov cocktail throwing radicals. The prevailing wisdom was that these richer instruction sets would be better for software. By going backwards to these simple primitive instruction sets, we're going to have more software projects would fail because we had these dangerous ideas. So we would go to places like this several times between 1980 and 1984 and participate in debates where people got angry and shout. And John and I would be on one side and then panelists and then the whole audience would be on the other side. So we'd try to make our points. And after a couple of years, they finally started to come around.
But industry was very resistant. I remember one famous computer pioneer saying to me, well, the problem is you're going to threaten their existing revenue because you're bringing out a technology that's much more cost effective. So you're going to take that mini computer that they sell for $200,000 and replace it with a box that costs $25,000.
Sounds kind of disruptive.
Yeah, it's disruptive, right? And that always worries people, and that's exactly what happened. There were a lot of people who didn't believe it and didn't believe it was going to happen. And,
there's people today that still don't believe RISC is good.
But Intel was getting faster at such a fast rate while you were doing that.
Yeah, so lots of things happened with Intel. First of all, they discovered that the really clever way to implement a so-called CISC instruction set is to translate the instructions into RISC instructions and then build a pipeline of the RISC instructions. And in fact, that happened, and they did it effectively in the Pentium Pro. And that made a big difference in terms of their efficiency, right? Caches consumed more and more chip area, so other things mattered less. But the one difficult problem you can't overcome, that they've never overcome, which is design cost and design time. Right. So Intel's just fine if they have a 2 or 3 year design cycle and they have a team of 400 engineers. But in this world where, for example, in the mobile world, you have to have 5 different chips, not just one chip that covers the space. You need people who can really do the designs quickly, can verify them quickly, can get them right, and ship them quickly. And that's really changed the whole space.
And RISC is an advantage.
Yeah.
And that's
Big
why
advantage
RISC
to
is
design.
today just taking over.
It's the design time, and it's because of what John said about the energy. If there's less transistors, that's more energy efficient.
And when you have to sell chips for $10, or in the IoT space, you've got to sell a processor for $1.
Yeah.
You're not going to sell an x86 that's got to have a gigantic translation mechanism for $1.
Yeah, the price is really going to have to come down there. It's for sure. And so what's going on? I mean, Apple's now making its own chips, Google's making its own chips, and you know, that just wasn't happening back then.
Yeah, right. I mean, Google started buying everything off the shelf, right? And over time, it started designing its own boxes, and then its own networks, stuff like that. And so, you know, as John had said earlier, you know, it used to be these horizontal companies, and they're becoming vertically integrated. I think there's...
Is that something you were glad to see? Or you didn't?
Am I glad to see? Yeah.
Or you didn't?
Well, for me, if you're in the business of selling ideas, you want to find people who are anxious to try new ideas. A problem has been, you know, when there was, just say, Intel and ARM are the two purveyors of instruction sets and chips, you have to go convince them. You write your papers, you go beg them, they're gatekeepers. These more software-centered companies may well be more open to more innovations because it just has to work inside their companies.
And it's driven by where the innovation opportunity is, Diane. So you know, for a long time we were on these general purpose processors that kept getting faster and faster, and then as efficiency of those processors became lower and lower, we had to look for another route. That route is trying to optimize designs for particular domains. So machine learning, building things like the tensor processing unit that's tailored at that. Well, who has the expertise that's required there? It's the company, it's the vertically oriented companies that have the software expertise, that have the expertise to build a language and translation system that can target that hardware. So it's an interesting change. I think we're going to see people who do computer architecture work have to become much more like Renaissance people. They're going to have to be able to talk to people way up the software stack and understand what they care about in a very different way. And I think that's exciting for the field.
Yeah, it is because it was getting so specialized,
Yeah.
It's almost a reversal. And then you look at the cloud where you see so many workloads, you know, so probably the cloud vendors are seeing more workloads than the processor vendors get to see.
Right. Yeah, I guess the excitement, well, the other excitement is the cloud vendors, it's a closed ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
If you decide, inside the company, they only have to work in one spot, right? You don't have to make it for the general purpose market and all kinds of crazy situations. It's got to work. It only has to work there. So I think that can shorten the lead time. And so far, these big companies have been pretty bold about making bets in this area. You know, Microsoft's making a big bet around FPGAs. Google's doing it around custom chips. Rumors are Amazon and others are doing exotic things. So it's a very exciting time.
Any
a lot of
rumors about Alibaba, Tencent?
I think they're doing chips too.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting time because one of the things that happened that we didn't expect was, even though we switched to high-level languages and standard operating systems, in the 80s and 90s, shrink wrap became more important because of the domination of the PC in the space. Shrink wrap software became really important.
I guess
and that actually reduced the choices.
Yeah, the volume of PC.
The volume was so large that became the focus. I mean, even look at companies that build software, even some that started originally building software for Macs, converted to PC-only companies because it dominated the space.
Volume, yeah.
And that limited the amount of creativity and the amount of innovativeness that could go into that. Once we get that innovation quotient up, I think we do lots of new things.
It limited the innovation because it all was for one person defining the processor they all had to work
Well,
with.
binary compatibility with x86 instruction set is extraordinarily valuable. And I guess another way to think about it right now is I think what the companies are doing vertically, they're raising the level of abstraction. So when we go from, you know, x86 binary to TensorFlow, that's a really, or Python, that's a big jump. And if we go way up here, then there's lots of places to innovate and do things better.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. What about in the languages and the frameworks?
Well, these independent of what's going on in hardware, there's this move to try to make programmers more productive. And today, if you take computer science, you learn Python, which is a very cool language with all kinds of powerful features and these Jupyter notebooks. So really, productivity is the same thing. So is the word, and so we're seeing, in general, these scripting languages like Python, and then domain-specific things like TensorFlow or Halide or other things that are for narrower to improve their productivity.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the right way to go, because we're going to, if you're going to get performance out of it while maintaining software productivity, and it wouldn't help a lot if we forced programmers to do a lot more work in order to get hardware performance up. We've got to find a way to get both at the same time, and that's going to require some innovation on the programming environments, probably not just the languages, but also the entire programming environment, and how that works, and the feedback you give programmers.
And that'll feed on itself, because everybody, the third graders will be programming by the, everybody in the world will be.
Well, imagine third graders using machine learning.
Yeah,
it could be incredible.
Yeah. So what is will there be lots of different processors for machine learning, or? And I've heard you guys talk about what's happening in machine learning. It'd be really great.
It's this. I think in our careers, it's an unusual combination of a fast-moving, exciting application area that needs, because of the end of Moore's law, needs custom architecture ideas. So here's this. You're trying. Typically in computer architecture, it's like skeet shooting, right? It's going to take a few years. We want to be over there. Well, the skeet's like on, as on jets. Who knows where it's going to end up? So we have all these companies building hardware that's better than standard microprocessors for this. But who knows who's got the best idea, especially since it's moving fast. So, we're going to see, supposing there's 45 hardware centers around. So we expect to see many ideas being tried, and we'll see who wins. Historically, if you look back at computer architecture, the marketplace figures this out. Everybody tries these bets, and
you don't think they're going to be held back by the software needed to get their processor used?
The argument is since we've raised the level of abstraction, that's what people want to program in. Otherwise, that's the classic problem.
Yeah, that's the classic. And I think the world's changed. The world's changed in another important way. If you think back to the 80s and 90s and even the early 2000s, the desktop was still the dominant computing paradigm. Desktop and the small server behind it. All of a sudden, it's cloud and things you carry in your pocket, or IoT. It's not the middle of that space anymore. What does that say? That says there's a much greater variety in terms of energy, performance, cost, trade-offs. I've got to be able to build processors that cost $1, and then I can have a next generation Google Cloud with a second generation TPU that's actually liquid cooled. Right? Yeah, exactly. So that's a very different range of environments, different set of concerns. So it allows a lot more flexibility.
And as I think about it right now, what's in the middle? Binary compatibility is in the middle, right? And is binary compatibility matter in cloud? I don't think so. Does binary compatibility matter for most IoT? I don't think so. So that lets us innovate.
Yeah, so all these constraints are getting removed. It's pretty cool. And then along comes maybe quantum computing. Could you tell us what that is and what you think about that and when it might happen?
Tell them what it is.
So quantum computing is the technology of tomorrow. Yeah. The question is whether it always will be or not. And that's an open problem. The way I like to think about it is, if most of the people working on it are physicists as opposed to engineers, then it's more than 10 years away. And right now, most of the people are physicists. Whether or not they'll be able to, the real challenge in quantum is whether or not you can scale. Right? It has, for certain problems, it has tremendous advantages, right? And the one problem it happens to do very well is the factoring problem, which poses a challenge to all the cybersecurity mechanisms we use, because the RSA algorithm depends on being able to factor large integers, not being able to factor large integers quickly. So that would create a real difficulty. There are other areas where it has great advantages. Quantum chemistry, for example, being able to simulate chemical reactions at an extremely fine level of detail. But to do that, to do interesting versions of that problem, which you really care about are larger organic molecules, now you've got to build a pretty big quantum computer. Remember that a quantum computer is operating at a few millikelvins above absolute zero. So physically, I have to keep something that holds that computer at a temperature which is very close to absolute zero. That's very hard to do. Vibrations in the room, sensing the data. You walk near a quantum computer that's not adequately shielded with a cell phone, the state of the quantum computer will completely change. So whether or not you have to maintain this quantum state in order to get it to do its computing, but then eventually you have to sense that quantum state. The physics is incredible. I think we're going to learn a lot about that domain. How general purpose these machines are going to become, that's an open question.
But I think of it as like a computer equivalent of fusion reactors, right? It's a really good thing to work on. If they ever get it working, it will be transforming. But it's at least 10 years out, and it's not. We're not going to have quantum cell phones, you know. So so I'm glad people are working on it. I admire people who take these long-term things, but in my career, it's really hard to see 5 or 7 years out. So I've enjoyed working on things with a shorter horizon.
Like 2 years, 3 years?
No, we look do 5-year projects hoping to change the world in 7 years. We're often wrong. So the longer your horizon, the harder it is to be right.
That actually, you're sort of bringing up research, and of course both of you have spanned academics and industry, and the relationship between those two is perhaps evolving. I don't know how you feel about it, but I'd love to hear how you think about it.
I think one of the strengths of our field is we have this synergistic relationship between industry and academia. There's other fields like biology or others where there's an adversarial relationship. Is somehow one side is you're selling out if you go to industry and you only do research. We've never had that attitude in our field. I think there's an issue right now.
Really? Not even when all the machine learning people keep leaving being professors?
That's a small problem. It's a small problem because if all the machine learning people leave to go to industry, then nobody's going to educate the next generation of machine learning people.
No, industry will.
Maybe, perhaps.
Yeah, I would say that the last 5 years, because
or AutoML will solve it.
But the last 5 years has been this surge of interest in machine learning that has commercial significance. So the salaries are going way up. So it's a little worrying. There was a time early in our careers there was this concern about eating the seed corn. Is the computer, microprocessors or the internet or something is so valuable, they were going to suck up everybody from universities, and then if they did that, there'd be nobody to educate. So I think right now it's machine learning. It's an issue, but in the big picture, there's always been bright young people who want to be academics, and they're not getting 100% of it. He was president, so what do you think?
Well, I think the great thing, as you said, the great thing about our field is this give and take, this back and forth, and a mutual respect between what happens in industry and what happens in the academy. And lots of fields, that's not the case. They think the academicians think that people in industry are all doing boring work, and the people in industry all think the academicians are doing useless work. We don't have that in computer science, and I think partly because it's a fast-moving field. There's a lot happening. You can do research, which 10 years later can change the field, and that's an incredible thing.
And is that generally going on where the longer-term research for computer science is in academia and the shorter-term stuff is in industry, or is that?
That's probably true.
Yeah, probably true, although clearly there are people making some investments. DeepMind is a long-term investment. Both Microsoft and Google have big investments in quantum. Those are long-term investments. Think of those in the same way that AT&T once thought of Bell Labs as a long-term investment, and certainly it was an investment that paid off well for the country.
And so, engineering as it evolves, I recently heard a talk by this guy in Arizona that's kind of got a brand new engineering school. What's his name? Michael somebody?
Michael Crow?
Yeah.
At Arizona State?
Yeah. Is that
I don't know about it.
Well, I think people are certainly reinventing engineering. I think there's been a lot of computer scientists have the great advantage compared to other engineering.
He did away with departments.
He did away with departments, and he has basically an integrated school.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's a lot more interdisciplinary things. The number of disciplines pulling on computer science right now is phenomenal. Right, there are certain disciplines always pulled, right? I mean, the medical profession, but the number of the social sciences, the big data machine learning revolution that's occurring in the social sciences is phenomenal. And we're going to discover things about the way we are as people and as a society, the way to improve our society from that big data revolution that are going to be really important. And I think computer science, I was astonished because when I became president in 2000, when I became president of Stanford, I thought computer science had its run. It was going to be fine, but the biologists and the medical people were going to drive it. Right?
It was the century of biology.
Functional genomics, it was the century of biology. Functional genomics, all these kinds of things. And not that functional genomics is not important, but computer science may be the most important thing for functional genomics to actually find out what it's trying to find out.
That's right.
So we've seen this incredible revolution. We've seen a growth in student demand.
Yeah.
We finally are seeing an increase in the number of women in the discipline, thank God, after many years of struggling with it. I think those are all healthy things. We're attracting the best and the brightest young minds across the whole country, across the world. They're coming to work in our field. That's really exciting.
Because the field is about the whole world. And
Yeah, it's changing the world. It is changing the world.
Yeah.
And both business and the disciplines.
Yeah, and you know, when John and I got into this, it was, I think our relatives didn't think we were really going to computing. Okay, if you want to. But now, no, that's
father taught me, you know, hardware's okay, but don't do that software stuff.
Actually, my father told me to stay out of computers too. Anyhow, just one more question, and then we'll turn to the audience. And I don't know.
And there's microphones somewhere there. Oh, there's one.
Yeah, there's two microphones on either side, but and I don't, you know, maybe there's nothing to say here, but I just, you know, tech, and it's drawn so much money, and you've had so many students found companies, John's founded companies, and so on. And how, you know, and we have Bill Gates, who's gone off and he's a full-time philanthropist now. How do you think about, I mean, and you've kind of done philanthropy all your life and that you've been teachers, but how do you think about philanthropy in the world and everybody in tech?
Well, look, a thing that I guess, I had some time between I got the job offer and I showed up at Berkeley, so I read a book that was where they interviewed, it was called Working by Seth Strickle. He interviewed a lot of people about their careers.
Called Working what?
It was called Working, where he interviewed, say, 40 people in different disciplines.
Mendel told me about that.
And what I got out of that book is that the people who either they built things that lasted forever, like the Empire State Building or the Golden Gate Bridge, or they worked with people, like priests or teachers, really felt a lot of satisfaction that they affected people's lives. So that was, I kind of went in expecting that. And then I think in America, we kind of grew up thinking if you're rich, you're happy. But, you know, if you're trying to be happy, you can just try to be happy directly, and rich may not be part of it. So I think that's kind of driven what I did. And people have started studying what makes people happy, and one of those things is helping other people. That makes you influencing people, you know, helping them is a thing that makes you happy. So, yeah, I think if you'd like to be happy, you should help people.
You know, I think it's been fascinating to watch. I remember a discussion I had with Bill Gates probably now 25 years ago, asking him about what his philanthropic thoughts were. And he said to me, I'm too busy running Microsoft right now. I don't have time to think about it yet. But if you've met Bill, you know he is an extremely focused, driven individual, and you know that from the way he ran Microsoft as well, and what he managed to do there. When he became a philanthropist, he became a real philanthropist. I mean, he could sit down with our faculty in medical school and talk about biology and infectious diseases at levels that few can other than professionals. And he and Melinda are really committed to making a difference in the world, to measuring it. you know, I saw that happen at Gordon Moore now, and what they've been able to do with the Moore Foundation and putting money into their two big things.
I have to say, Bill Gates seems like one of the most joyous people now.
He's happy.
Yeah.
Right?
He is happy doing his
Bill
work.
Gates happy.
He's happy doing. They really love it, and it's a team. It's a team effort for he and Melinda. I mean, seeing Gordon Moore do it and being able to, you know, I was up in Alaska visiting work they're doing on conservation in Alaska, and see what they've been able to do to restore wild salmon habitat that was in danger of vanishing forever. I mean, it's phenomenal. You know, sitting with Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla and talking about their philanthropic ambitions and their desire to really reduce the damage of human disease. I think in each case, each one of these people, it's given them something really exciting in their lives. You know, early on when I was president, I was looking for some inspiration about how to inspire people to become more philanthropic.
Yeah.
And I read a book by Ron Chernow, the person who wrote the Hamilton book, the famous Hamilton book, about John Rockefeller, the creator of Standard Oil. He had a heart attack and he almost died when he was 50. He retired. He became a lifelong philanthropist. He started the University of Chicago. He started the Rockefeller Foundation. And he lived to be well into his late 90s.
Well,
and had a joyous life.
Yeah.
So I think giving back brings joy to people, doing it well, which we're all smart people, we're creative, we like to do it well, I think is something that can really help make the world a better place.
well, thank you for that. Let's get these guys to And we have quite a line, so we'll start here.
Hi, I'm Max from IBM Cloud and IBM Research. It's an honor to ask a question of you guys. Two questions, but you can answer one if you want.
Yeah, we're looking for short questions.
Yeah, very good. So imagine I'm a PhD student at one of your institutions. What advice would you give me? What problem would you advise me to work on? And instead, also, if I was a startup, you know, somebody setting us up, what problem would you advise me to work on?
In terms of PhD students, wow, this is a lot of exciting areas. I can say that, you know, I'm sure both Stanford and Berkeley are inundated with people who want to learn machine learning. It's, you know, 3/4 of our applicants are around that, and we can't let everybody in one area, then we've got to spread it out. But machine learning, I think there's been an uptick in architecture interest, maybe because of architecture and machine learning. But it's a very broad, rich area.
Yeah, so I would work on compiler and language technology for domain-specific architectures, because there is such a big gap there. It's a new field. The opportunity to build technology which will make you a hero to both the applications people and the architects is phenomenal. So that's an area I would work on.
Yeah, if you see our lecture, John's got a slide that shows that Python unoptimized versus Python optimized, the gap is 63,000. So if you do it by hand. So
if you get just 10% of that 63,000 gap, you'll have created the best compiler technology in the world. So
startups, that's a hard one. Startups are hard.
We'll go over here. Thank you.
Is RISC-V going to be a game changer? And related, is open source hardware going to have a similar impact that open source software has in the past 20 years?
What a great question. So RISC-V is the 5th generation RISC project at Berkeley. We were using it in our courses, and then companies started complaining about us changing our instructions in our courses, and why do you care? It's because there's this thirst for an open architecture. And we're trying to make that happen. There's a RISC-V Foundation that's got more than 150 members. Companies have already announced that they're shipping it in products, including NVIDIA and Western Digital. So I'm really excited about this opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity for researchers that there's an industrial strength version of a hardware and software stack that's completely open and everybody can use. I think RISC-V is definitely going to be successful, and we just have to decide how successful it's going to be. Will it be the architecture for IoT? Because there's no precedent there and you can use it. Will it be everywhere? right? I think it's going to be successful. It's the early days of it. We're hoping it'll be as successful as Linux's or operating systems. I don't know what you would say about Linux and operating systems. Is it the dominant operating system today? Linux? I don't know. What do you think, John?
Well, I think there's certainly an opportunity. I think what the hardware industry needs to do is it needs to adopt openness. Part of it is the ISA. The rest of it will be how we exchange IP and we move IP around. That has to happen in order to really liberate designers to do everything they can do.
But there's another foundation that's getting started that's around open implementations.
Yeah.
It's called. It's the same idea. Can we agree? How do we share IP that everybody can use? But yeah, I guess I don't see any technical reason open architectures can't be as successful as software.
Agreed.
There's no technical reason, and you see proprietary versions of IP like ARM be successful in people using them. So I think it can happen, and we'll see how many hardware people volunteer to make this stuff available, which happens in software. So I think it's probably going to happen, but it's we'll know in a few years.
Thank you.
Hi. When we went from mainframes that were difficult to program to personal computers that were much easier, I mean, is this a problem that we're going to consolidate like CPUs at the cloud and that's not so easy to program? And what can maybe do to make it easy for people coming in?
I don't think, I was there. I don't think mainframes, personal computers made it easier to program. The difference was you didn't have to get up in the middle of the night to get your work done, and the difference was it was a very wimpy processor, right? You had, the programming was difficult because very limited, the first Mac had 128 bytes and very limited resources, but you had it all to yourself. That was the exciting thing. And then, but today the programming environments on mainframes are no different than the programming environments on your desktop, right? It's the same languages and stuff like that. Yeah. So I don't think so.
I think you'd like both programmer efficiency and processor hardware efficiency in terms of execution. And I think the question is, can you design an environment where you get both? I think the one thing we can't sacrifice is we can't sacrifice security. And unfortunately, we have in some cases sacrificed security in order to get hardware performance or ease of use sometimes, right? Why is it so easy to get somebody's password? Because it's easy to hack the password back out. So those are things we've got to fix. I think security is just far too important. Privacy is far too important. And certainly Google Cloud invests a lot in this. It's going to be critical going forward.
Yeah, top priority.
Hi, I have more of a general question. I'm from oil and gas, and as you guys said...
You're from where?
Oil and gas.
Okay.
And as you guys said, technology and computer science is making a great impact all over the world. So I just wanted to gauge what your opinion is in terms of the fact that since data is power, do you guys see any disruptions in terms of the government or political systems of that sort? I mean, for example, do you see the power shift from having government to just moving into the technical industry or something of that sort? I know it's a very vague and...
Yeah, I mean, it could happen. I think the challenge we face is there's a lot of data out there. It is valuable. It is important. Companies want to keep it. Individuals want to keep their own data private. I think we've got to evolve our privacy mechanisms. I worry that if government becomes too involved in legislating it, the one thing I can tell you is that government always legislates a solution to the problem from 5 years ago and doesn't change the legislation once the problem shifts. I mean, look at our copyright law. Our copyright law was written for when books were physical things and you printed them and they were really expensive. And it's stuck in the same definition. So we've got to evolve that and try to create mechanisms. And I think it's going to require the industry to take a stronger leadership position so that government doesn't become the default provider of legislative solutions.
And we need to educate the government leaders in technology. I mean,
absolutely.
Everybody needs to be educated in technology. It's like learning to read. Because the next generation better have a technology background.
Well, government can also be part of the problem. my personal information, including my social security number, the social security number of my wife, all my kids' names, everything, wasn't given away by information I have on a Google Cloud. It was given away by the U.S. government who was hacked into. So it's, I think they've got to up their game as well before they start trying to fix other people.
Yeah.
There's strategies to improve the performance per watt through hardware efficiency improvements and code efficiency. But I don't hear a lot of discussion around the improvement in the utilization of compute resources. So you have the idea of comatose servers, zombie servers, and that's even true, they're finding now in the virtual machine space, where typical human beings, you know, we use things and then we put them in storage and then we forget about them and we don't take care of them. We have a lot of digital photos on our computers that we haven't curated. So there's a lot of unused resources out there. And so is there an effort underway to address that in terms of using machine learning to say when a resource is being used effectively or not, and if it's not, can you repurpose it or decommission it, et cetera?
Not that I'm
Well,
aware.
it's a good question. I think certainly I know the people at Google care a lot about efficiency of large-scale
Google
data.
Cloud, I mean, you know, resource usage is super important. A lot,
Yeah.
you know, you can do a lot of work to overcommit things when you know that things aren't being used, and that reduces waste.
But you're talking about, you know, YouTube is, as far as I can tell, is promising to keep videos forever. You know, it's kind of nice to have a kind of
Well, the storage.
an archival storage so we don't lose things. I mean, you know, I remember there's a friend of mine started the Internet Archive because his belief was we needed to capture what's on the internet and be lost, and that's, you know, historically really important. So, you know, there's this, I guess there's a trade-off between keeping the historical record and underutilization.
We probably could do a better job of garbage collection. I mean, I don't know how many copies of my photos are sitting somewhere on Google Drive, as well as on my home machine, as well as in a machine in my office. There are probably 5 copies of most of my photos, right? So, and multiple copies of videos. We could do a little garbage collection so that maybe there are just 2 copies out there, and that would be just fine. That's a good idea.
Yeah, it is a good idea. Thank you. I'm going to go one more to this side since your line is longer.
All right, it's an honor to be able to ask you guys questions. Back to computer architecture. We're seeing the end of Moore's Law, an explosion of interesting shifts in deep learning, GPU, neuromorphic. What about for the existing kind of more normal workloads, databases, web servers, parsing, template rendering? Are we to see an explosion of specialized processors to replace existing x86 systems for those workloads?
Well, I think computer architects believe that if you can't depend on general purpose processors to go faster. We're basically it. In the first figure of our book, we plotted it every year, and it was like this, and now it's flat. You know, in the latest edition, it suggests doubling performance every 20 years. It's like infinity. So as far as we know, if you want to make anything go faster, you're going to need to have some kind of accelerator. Now, one of the questions is how far is machine learning going to go? So there's a recent result by a professor at MIT, Tim Kraska, where he's taken this vulnerable data structure, the B tree, fundamental to databases, and he said, you know, what I'm thinking of machine learning has done is calculate very quickly the probability of distribution of all my data. If I know that, I can build a really great data structure. So he's basically, it's kind of one of these machine learning results where we replace all this complicated stuff by a pretty simple idea, simple algorithm learned from data that runs much better. So, is that the tip of the iceberg? You know, are we going to find all?
Network routing is doing that. Network routing, they're doing that.
Yeah, so are we going to start looking at our own internal technology and say, you know what? All that code can be replaced by some machine learning-based results, which is a lot simpler, and that'll accelerate us. And if you want to make that machine learning stuff go faster, we know how to build hardware to do that. Kind of, you know, it's a godsend for architects, right? What's the fundamental operation they want to do? They want to do matrix multiply. We know how to build matrix multiply. There's a lot of stuff we don't know how to do, but matrix multiply we can do pretty damn well. So if that's going to happen, you know, so we'll see accelerators. Probably we'll see accelerators through legacy software stacks maybe it'll be machine learning based or maybe more custom.
Yeah, I think Dave's right. I mean, I think the one thing, you should just use general purpose processors for the things they're good at. One of the things they're not good at, for example, is moving data around. Because moving data does all the wrong thing for caches. Instead of getting lots of reuse, it's bring it in, move it once, move it another time. So if you look at large-scale data centers, for example, they spend a lot of time moving data from network packets into operating system space, into user space. We could improve that whole thing and offload it. So instead of trying to make the machine faster, pull that stuff out. Put it in a special purpose unit that handles that. I think we'll see innovations like this coming along as we try to improve the performance of these large-scale environments.
Thank you.
Hi, I work in public education in Canada, and I saw you guys mentioned that you're able to evolve very quickly at post-secondary institutions here in California. We find it hard to keep software curriculum up to date. We don't know how we're going to deal with that problem, where it takes maybe 5 years for the system nationwide to bring itself up to speed.
I think there's tremendous interest in trying to help with education. I think there's code.org here, which is an attempt to bring computing to the high schools or even younger. So I think there's a lot of people in the IT field who really want to improve the quality of IT education or computing in the grade schools here. That stuff I think is available everywhere, right? And you don't need much. A Google thing that they do is the Chromebook. This is like a godsend for high schools. Certainly, the biggest problem for they have no staff to do the maintenance of this hardware or the software, and the Chromebook is just use Google Cloud products and this pretty cheap hardware. That's a huge boon there. So I think with Chromebooks and open source software, I could imagine the K-12 doing tremendously better education around computing than was available before.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think 3 R's has changed to 3 R's plus computing. I mean, computing is such a fundamental concept. The challenge we have is ensuring that there are enough people like you out there who can play a role in being teachers in this field, and that's going to be our challenge. We've got to produce more people who can teach basic computing to young people.
And more tools to help them. I know my daughter taught at a software coding camp this summer that was K through 8.
Wow, yeah.
And she said the kindergartners could barely hold the mouse, but they knew, they kind of knew what they were doing.
It's really hard to lecture to kindergartners. Wow. Well, good luck.
Yeah.
Hi, speaking of academics, I'm a college student, in particular an undergraduate college student. And at least in my own experience on separate projects, I know that the cloud is clearly the future. Though as an undergraduate student, it's not too often that we see a lot of exposure in cloud technologies, particularly machine learning. Now, my institution was fortunate. We worked a lot with Google. We had the advanced bracketology team on campus, where we filled an auditorium with students that were interested. But for anyone looking at trying to explore the field, they really need to wait until they hit the 500, 600 level courses available to graduate students. So my question is, how do we get the exposure down to the undergraduate students, people at the sophomore or junior level?
At Berkeley, I taught a sophomore course, and we took advantage of cloud computing. We were teaching MapReduce back then. I think the cloud companies, well, I believe, I'll find out. The cloud companies have a pretty generous, enlightened self-interest, right? This is
Google helps quite a lot at Google Cloud.
And it's not just graduates, it's undergraduate. In fact, I think these companies, you can just say, I'm teaching a course, and they'll give you so much per head for undergraduate courses, and I think they're kind of routinely approved.
Yeah. And I think I think you'll see machine learning courses come down further in the curriculum. There's a little more math that most computer scientists need to know, and that's part of the challenge right now. You've got to learn some statistics.
Yeah, we certainly have
but it'll happen.
I think Stanford and Berkeley, we have a...
Yeah, calculus is still required.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say machine learning increases the importance of math.
Oh, absolutely.
That's
a different kind of math.
Different kind of math. No, but certainly Berkeley has, and probably Stanford too, has junior, senior level courses.
Yeah.
And they're very, very popular.
Yeah, I think Berkeley's also been very innovative in how they've used student teachers to help do that.
Undergraduates help teach.
Yeah. I'm in high school right now, and I'm planning a high school hackathon in October. And I was wondering, we're going to target emerging technologies, and I was wondering, like, what emerging technologies would you choose to have, like, high school students learn and develop on current learning?
Yeah, machine learning. Arduino boards. I mean, there are a lot of things you can do that are Arduino boards are great because you can build something. You get your hands on real hardware. You can build something. It's pretty easy. It's cheap. And it's cheap. And you can do some amazing things. They're a really great prototype of technology.
Do you have access? Do you have access to computing? Will they bring their own computers?
It's going to be bring your own computers, but we will have computers for people to develop.
What a cool thing to do.
Okay. Good luck with it.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Hi, I am honors propedeutic program prospective student, and I would like to see what about the chances and risks to scale classes worldwide.
To scale classes abroad?
Yes, from the HCP program.
Yeah, well, I think all of our institutions are putting lots of course material and educational material online. I think that's an important way to get material out there, and I think if you look historically, many institutions, as they grew, used material initially from other institutions, more well-established institutions, as a way to bootstrap, and I think it's a great idea.
I think we are actually out of time. I see the zeros. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane.